Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to share with you on this Family Access Conference. We're going to be focusing on building interpersonal skills. I'm excited to be with you and to share with you some insights, some thoughts, some skills, some information that hopefully will be beneficial for you and can help you live your life more successfully and in a more fulfilling way. This topic of interpersonal skills is one that is very near and dear to my heart, but more on that later. First, I'd like to start out by giving a little bit of my own professional background, and then we'll move into the heart of what I'm going to share with you this afternoon. I received my undergraduate degree in psychology at UCLA, and then did my graduate work, my master's and PhD in Canada. I graduated in 1981 and began working for my first job at the UCLA School of Medicine. While there, my colleagues and I ran a research unit at a large psychiatric hospital, which of course these systems by and large don't exist anymore. And we were focused on, at that time, doing social skills training with the patients who were at the hospital. These were individuals who suffered from psychosis, chronic psychosis, schizophrenia. And our role and our mission was to develop methods to train interpersonal skills to these individuals who lacked them to a most significant degree. We published pretty extensively about all our work, was well received in the mental health community. And thereafter, I moved over and began a program, an innovative program at the same hospital to develop what we call the TheLife Skills Center. This was a new concept back at the time in the mid-1980s. And in this endeavor, our goal was to develop a protocol and method to systematically teach and train these social skills across a whole variety of different life skill areas that these individual patients who came into the hospital service would then be equipped with when they left the hospital so that they could live a more fulfilling and meaningful and successful life outside of the hospital. So again, the topic of social skills and its development and execution is very, very, very much near and dear to my heart. And again, more on this later as I expand a bit. After the stint in developing the Life Skills Center, which again was fortunately extremely well received across the state, we got some national attention as well. I moved into private practice and focused on my clinical expertise and forensic work, and did research in the area of psychological assessment. My interest in family law, and specifically my first encounter with parental alienation, took place quite a while afterwards, in about 2007, 2008. At that time, I became fascinated by the challenges of high conflict divorce. And in the context of doing both custody evaluations and treating individuals who had been the victims of parental alienation, a colleague and I developed a tool, an assessment tool that was designed to make the custody evaluations more systematic, fairer, more objective, and simply easier to execute and easier to understand, so that judges and attorneys and the parents themselves had a better understanding of the issues involved in their divorce and the dissolution of their relationships, and how to help move their families forward, keeping their kids intact and everybody happy and healthy and interactive with one another. Thereafter, I ended up focusing more and more on treating alienated parents, alienated grandparents, other family members, and then doing reunification work as well. And this is where I am today in my career. So I want to share with you now the goals of this webinar, and give you a little bit of an outline of what my expectations are of myself to be able to share with you. First, I'd like you to leave the presentation today with a better understanding of the role of interpersonal skills in our daily lives. Of course, there is nothing that we do in our lives, by and large, I shouldn't say nothing, but very few things that we do in our daily lives that don't involve some aspect of interpersonal connection with somebody else. We'll be talking a lot about that today. The entire notion of interpersonal skills or social skills or communication skills, these are all synonyms, of course. This is a very broad and overarching topic and a concept because it involves so many different components and nuances. And it is my hope to help you get a general understanding of all these pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that will ultimately fit together. Another goal is to enable you to be able to define the terms that we use in discussing communication skills and the effectiveness of interpersonal interplay, individuals working with one another to hopefully help both of those parties achieve more in their lives. And we want to talk about the role, very broadly, of interpersonal skills in the larger scheme of society and how that plays out. I'd like you to be able to recognize the types of social skills that are involved in effective communications with others. And in addition to the types, exactly how those types are applied in various challenges in society and how we use them in our daily lives and can use them more effectively. And then finally, I'd like you to become familiar with the various methods that we use as professionals of boosting the quality of your social interactions to help you become more effective in how you communicate and convey your messaging to other people. So what does this entail? Let me give you a brief outline of the topics we're going to be covering today in the next about 1 hour. First of all, we're going to talk about social interaction versus social communication. In other words, the way people interact with each other and the nature of that interaction on effective communication. Interaction is not necessarily communication. Second, we want to talk about the role of social skills in and around relationships, why they are important, why they are meaningful, how they work, how sometimes they don't work. And if they don't work, how we might be able to fix them. We're going to talk a little bit about the components of successful communication and effective social relationships. These are the mechanics of successfully communicating with other people, as well as the process of how best to communicate and deliver our messages that we want to convey to others. We're going to talk about the different types of social competencies. Mind you, when we interact with others, there are lots of different ways that we are perceived by others. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us, actually, to build competencies around a wide variety of areas. And we're going to be talking about that as well. Most certainly, we as well will be talking about specifically social skills for family members who have been alienated, parents and grandparents. What is unique about you, about the unfortunate class to which you are now have joined as a member, as an alienated individual within a family? Are there unique social skills? Are there certain circumstances that are special, that perhaps apply only to individuals who have been estranged and pulled apart and away from their loved ones? Next, we're going to talk about the principles of successful interpersonal behavior, and just basically a laundry list of the best ways to succeed in communicating with others. And then finally, if we have time, we're going to talk a little bit about assertiveness skills, which is a key component in effective communication. So let's begin. First of all, I have been in practice for about 40 years now. And nearly every clinical case that I have had across literally thousands of individuals with whom I have worked over these many decades, nearly every clinical case has involved at some level addressing the issue of social skills, how people communicate and interact with others, how to do it more effectively in a more satisfying way. helping people make friends, helping to improve marriages, helping kids attend school without anxiety, helping individuals resolve the abuse that they see as happening in their workplace and to them specifically, to help individuals who are socially isolated and who are afraid of having others in their lives for fear that they might be judged or misjudged. Now, I've entitled the topic of my talk today as Talking Heads from Chatter to Connections. Why that title? Well, to be honest with you, as I began preparing for today's talk many months ago, actually, it struck me that there is a vast difference, of course, between the appearance of communicating and actually connecting with others. And what came to mind was a video I saw when I was just a graduate student, and it was a video of young children who were speaking to one another. These were largely infants and toddlers who did not yet possess effective communication skills, effective language. And so when you looked at these little babies, ostensibly, they were appeared to be talking to each other. They were modeling what they were perceiving in their respective homes. So you have these little kids moving their lips, making eye contact, moving close to one another, and it would appear from a distance that they're actually having a conversation. But of course, it was nothing but babble. It was nothing but chatter. And there is a big difference between chattering and actually connecting emotionally and psychologically and spiritually and intellectually with others. So I called it talking heads because they look like they're heads that are talking, but they're not. And of course, Talking Heads was a wonderful rock and roll group in the 1980s. And speaking of rock and roll, as long as I'm at it, I want to share with you one of my favorite rock and roll bands is called Pink Floyd. I'm sure many of you know of them and have heard their music. One of their most famous songs is a song entitled Comfortably Numb, N-U-M-B. And I was listening to this album coincidentally a number of weeks ago and paid attention for the first time to one of the lyrics in this song. And the lyric goes, quote, "Your lips are moving, but I can't hear what you're saying." And it suddenly struck me, oh my goodness, this is exactly the issue that we are facing in our current day and age of communication. People are moving their lips and saying words, but the individuals for whom those words are intended aren't listening, they aren't hearing. So when you think about the topography, the way it actually looks as if people are communicating, when we actually observe those individuals, we realize that those people could indeed be communicating, or they could simply be going through the motions of trying to communicate. In other words, babbling and speaking when nobody else is listening is not communication at all. But it is an element of interpersonal behavior because we do have individuals who are interacting with each other, but for no purpose and no gain and no benefit. There is no effective outcome coming from this. You will remember, of course, the Bible story about the Tower of Babel, wherein God decides that ostensibly as a lesson to the people who are trying to build a tower to the heavens and to God, that the way to mess them up, so to speak, was to give them all different languages. And that is a lesson that we can take to heart as well, that without effective language, without effective connection, without the listener actually hearing what it is that we have to say, then we have no communication at all. And hopefully we can build better as we move forward, and including in today's talk, to learn a little bit more about how to do that effectively. So let me ask you, with regard to your social behavior, did you ever have a failed interpersonal encounter or a failed interpersonal relationship with anyone? Did you ever have an uncomfortable interaction with somebody? Did you ever get into an argument? Were you ever ignored? Did anyone ever cut in line in front of you at the Trader Joe's or at the local grocery store or the bank? Were you ever treated unfairly otherwise? Do you have any regrets about what happened in a relationship? Did you ever make a friend? Did you ever lose a friend? All of these questions speak to the nature of your interpersonal abilities and or the abilities of the other party with whom we were interacting. So we're going to be talking about the successes and failures of interpersonal interactions as we move through today's talk. You know, we are, as human beings, uniquely social creatures. It does not mean that other species are not social, but we as humans thrive when we are social. And in fact, to be social is a biologically driven need. We have a biological, innate, inherent need in our DNA to be involved in groups of individuals. There is a book that was actually a New York Times bestseller by an author whose name is Dr. Yuval Harari. The name of the book is entitled Sapiens. Dr. Harari is a professor of history at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he wrote this brilliant book entitled Sapiens, in which he draws out any number of fascinating statistics and a discourse on how it is we as humans became as successful on this planet as what is called the alpha predator, as the strongest predator on the planet and the most powerful one. Exactly why it is that we evolved in the way that we did. And he argues very effectively that it is evolutionarily advantageous as a species to develop groups, to foster groups, and turn those groups into small tribes, and those tribes into communities, and those communities into towns and cities, and those cities into city-states and countries, et cetera, et cetera. Evolutionarily advantageous. Now, the absence of regular and broad social contact with other people may result in a risk, in fact, a risk to our survival as a species, and more importantly, perhaps, to us as individuals. Why is that? Our mental health is dependent on it. So think of this. We have all just recently survived 30 months of challenge with the COVID pandemic. During this time, of course, many of us were quarantined for long periods of time, some less, some more, but we were all quarantined and isolated for months and months and months on end. It was miserable. I don't know of anyone that did not complain about the lack of contact with other people, be they acquaintances, be they strangers, be they friends, be they family members, be they anyone who remotely could offer some type of social contact. As a result of our COVID experience, the levels of anxiety and depression that has emerged within our society and the society worldwide has been beyond imagination, beyond expectation, and extraordinarily difficult to deal with. We are still very far from having solutions on how best to help support emotionally the billions of people who have suffered as a result of the isolation. And it is still occurring today. So we understand now from our own personal experiences that consistent social contact with other human beings is crucial for our good mental health. Additionally, there is the concept of what is referred to as social reinforcement, the idea that we can derive benefit and reward and good feelings from social contact. That could be nothing more than simply a word of praise, or a touch on the shoulder, or a hug, or simply an acknowledgement by eye contact, somebody smiling at you. Social reinforcement, the value that we derive from other people recognizing us as fellow human beings, as individuals, as other neighbors in our communities, as family members, cannot be overstated. Social contact is crucial for us as human beings. And hence, not just the social contact, but the skills that embody effective social communication are likewise critical. These are fundamental abilities to help us live successful lives. After all, you can't go out and buy groceries without being an effective participant in the social discourse. You can't go to school. You can't go to work without having effective social skills. Even if you're working remotely, it does not mean you are not interacting socially. If you want to ask for a raise from your boss, you need to have social skills. If you want to drive a car on the highway, you need effective social skills. If you want to eat at a restaurant, you need social skills. If you want to walk the dog in your neighborhood, you need effective social skills. As you can already see, the scope of different types of behaviors that are is vast and unlimited. So how important are interpersonal skills in our lives? The answer is that our ability to effectively interact with other human beings is essential in order to gain access to the resources that are required for us as individuals and as families to meet our needs. From an infant who is nursing, to a student that needs his teacher's help, to dating, to seeking a new job, to raising a family, all require advanced interpersonal skills. Hence, the opposite is true as well. The absence of effective social skills, in other words, social skills deficits at any level, can impair our functioning. Now, let's talk about the wide variety of ways that social activity plays roles in our everyday ongoing activities. A number of years ago, actually early in my career in the late 1980s and early 1990s, a colleague and I developed a psychological assessment instrument that was designed to measure a person's abilities and disabilities, where they were effective and where they were impaired. And so I'm going to share with you about a dozen or so of those items on this test, so to speak, that were identified, and was a scientifically valid instrument, so this is scientifically based, skills that are critical, fundamental, and necessary to living effective lives. Reducing and managing one's stress, calming oneself when you feel angry or hurt or depressed or nervous, resolving conflicts with other people, expressing anger or sadness without hurting other people. Do any of these require interpersonal skills? What about maintaining a positive outlook on your life and staying motivated in doing the things that you do? Maintaining a really positive and healthy self-image and a good self-esteem. Doing things when you have to travel or when you're afraid or fear that you might be panicking. Can you control and stop uncontrollable urges to do bad behaviors? Are you able to avoid doing things that might purposefully actually hurt yourself? Can you stop yourself from doing mean and hurtful things? Can you express your desires clearly and ask for what you want? Can you make your own decisions and say no if you need to? Can you get other people to understand you? Are you able to talk about yourself, your activities, interests, likes and dislikes? Are you able to meet people in new social situations or get involved in social activities such as church or sports or the like? Are you able to ask other people for emotional support and have somebody else listen and understand what you're feeling? Are you able to maintain a friendship with somebody outside your household with whom you can share your feelings? Or even perhaps more importantly, are you able to provide emotional support and comfort to other people who are in need? All of these items require some level of interpersonal interaction, meaning you're going to have to communicate with another person. Interpersonal skills are adaptive. And what does that mean? Adaptive means an act or a process of changing to better suit a situation. So in biology, we define it as the process by which a species becomes fitted to or symbiotic with its environment, meaning that this enables people, organisms, to survive and thrive in their habitats. Interpersonal skills are adaptive. Interpersonal skills as well must be used strategically. What does that mean? These skills, these abilities to interact with other people and communicate your needs and wants must be done with a purpose. So it begs the question, what is your goal in having the interaction with another person? What does that other person really want? What's the best way to give them what they want while still achieving your own goals? What should you avoid in ensuring that there's, what should you avoid to ensure that there's no distractibility by the other person so they actually hear what it is that you're trying to say to them? How do you gain their attention in the first place so they know that indeed you want to communicate with them? How do you create a short-term and long-term benefit for you and for the other person from your actions? Albeit based upon what I've shared with you thus far, you recognize already that interpersonal skills are extremely complicated, and they are absolutely the most complex and advanced behavioral ability that we must possess. Our ability to get along with other people. Doing so is instrumental in all aspects of our lives. In a more challenging way, I would offer you, our social environment and the demands, because they are constantly changing and the nature of the demand is constantly in flux. What we are working with is a social environment that is dynamic. Every day it is changing. Therefore, our ability to interact socially in our worlds must be flexible, must be vast and broad, but we must be able to pivot and turn at every twist, around every corner, so that we can expect the unexpected and behave and react properly. And here's the rub. Despite the fact that our human interactions play a central role in our ability to be effective and happy in life, there is yet never been any formalized training in interpersonal skills in our individual lives. We have to learn it from our social environment. It's not like an animal where they have perhaps a biologically innate DNA that says, this is how we interact with others of our own species. That doesn't exist for human beings. It all must be learned, and it starts by and large at home, as infants, as toddlers. We must be able to receive corrective feedback from individuals in our environment as to what is acceptable social behavior and what is unacceptable social behavior. We must instill that, practice it, and execute it consistently. Now, what happens for an individual wherein there's perhaps a psychological or neurological deficit? These individuals as well must be able to effectively engage and interact with society. What if they already possess a challenge up front? For example, I have a patient, this is a patient who is not an alienated parent, but a patient who is suffering from Parkinson's disease. He's a gentleman in his mid-80s. And he was actually sharing with me just this morning during one of my therapy sessions that he finds himself, actually his wife pointed this out, that he is missing the visual cues that are being given off by partners that he's having a conversation with. These could be friends, could be the handyman, could be his neighbors. He's missing the visual cues that he, in fact, is talking too much. And the fact that he is shifting from topic to topic. He's becoming what we call tangential, going off on tangents. He's missing it. And he recognizes that because he's missing those cues, his social skills, his ability to have a healthy and productive social interaction is wearing thin on some of these people. Now, just as a quick circle back to our COVID era, that you will all remember that for the longest period of time as well, we were all wearing masks. And what did that do? Despite the discomfort that it presented in just breathing, et cetera, it also covered up 60% of our faces, meaning over half of the visual cues that people rely on to determine how to interact with the other person. It made it extremely difficult. And you may recognize as well that after we finally removed our masks, it was almost like this breath of fresh air, sunshine. We can actually see the other person and have a better understanding of how they're feeling about interacting with us. So as children, we model our parents, we model guardians, we model our teachers, we model our peers. And we are taught, we learn as young people, common courtesies, which usually are taught at home. Saying, please, thank you. Saying, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, showing respect, being polite and civil. These are all lessons that are socially determined and that are a part of our social discourse that are important to live in a healthy society. So it's not only a question of possessing the mechanics of communicating, our command of language, our command of the vocabulary, our nonverbal skills, how we move our body, are we open or closed, our eye contact. The other element of language is referred to as paralinguistic. These are things like the tone of our voice, the cadence of our voice, the intonation of our voice. All of these mechanical elements must be delivered effectively, and more importantly, they must be read by the other individual to whom you're speaking correctly. They must be read properly. Reading the environment is absolutely fundamental in successfully navigating our social world. We must constantly scan our environment, our social environment, the people around us, and stay vigilant in that process in order to recognize when cues are being given to us on how to react within society. Going back to my example of my patient with Parkinson's. The ability to recognize signs and symbols of how to behave properly in society then points us to the path of how to communicate effectively with others. We are at every moment in our lives exposed to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and in the course of a month, a year, millions and millions of different types of cues, of stimuli in our environment. Things we see, things we hear, things we touch, things we taste. These elements of our society are all around us 24/7. And when we are awake, during our waking hours, we must remain diligent to being aware of all of those elements, all of those cues, and then determine, this is the tricky part, and then determine which of those elements that we are observing, the thousands and tens of thousands, which of those elements is actually important, which is salient, which is relevant to us. We want to filter those elements in and push out, filter out all the ones that are irrelevant. We can't take in all the irrelevant ones as well. There are too many. Our brains can't process that. So instead, we must be selective in how we pick and choose what to pay attention to in order to succeed in life. And once we identify what those elements are, then it's up to us to interpret the meaning of those things, what they are prompting us to do, or what they should be prompting us to do to interact socially. And we have to draw inferences from that. What does it mean if somebody is winking? What does it mean if somebody turns their back on you? What does it mean if somebody raises their voice? It may mean one thing in one context, something different in a different context. One thing by one person, something different by another person. The failure to read social cues produces observable, notable deficits in functioning. And I need go no further than to simply point out the challenges faced by individuals suffering from autism or on the spectrum disorders. The area of autism is a sub specialty of mine. I began working in that area of autism back in the 1970s, literally. And one of the hallmark features of deficiency in these individuals is the challenge in effectively reading social cues. Individuals suffering from autism, suffering from even disorders like ADD or ADHD, have a tendency to be what is sometimes referred to as over-selective or ineffective, wrongly selecting the cues of their environments, paying attention to those less relevant or completely non-salient cues, and instead reading the environment incorrectly, therefore not knowing how to respond. So many of these individuals seem aloof at times. Why aloof? Because they're not reading the social cues that are being emitted and produced by other people. They're not reading them correctly. So we must be determined to attend to all the salient social cues and be vigilant in that process. So how do we navigate and analyze the environments to ensure that we respond in a socially desirable, effective, and acceptable way? Well, there are no rules. So we're going to try to cover some of them now. Engaging socially is a performance issue. We must perform. We must do things to interact socially. The things that we do, the things that we say, which will be sent and then hopefully delivered to the person with whom we are speaking, must be done well. It must be done well. So you ask yourself a question. Will the message I'm attempting to deliver to this person be understood and comprehended in exactly the way that I intended it to be understood? This is actually one of the problems we have in today's society with text messaging, wherein information might be conveyed in a short sentence, partial sentence, a few words that perhaps have attached with them a certain sentiment that you are feeling and want to convey to the other party. But text messaging does not convey sentiment. It does not convey your feeling, does not convey a sense of your compassion and love. Instead, it is neutral. It is like antiseptic. It's just clean without any baggage associated with it. Therefore, frequently misinterpreted by the receiver. What are the verbal and nonverbal and the paralinguistic skills? We'll talk about some of these in a few moments. When do you say something? When do you do something when interacting in society? What's the timing? Does timing matter when you do something? And when you don't do something? Does hesitation sometimes get in the way of an effective outcome? Where do I do these things? If, for example, I want to give my spouse feedback on something she said or he said or did, do I do that in public or do I wait? Well, you know the answer to that already. The timing, the location of engaging and displaying certain types of social behaviors is also critically important, not just the components. How long do I actually speak? How long do I do these things in public before it becomes either seemingly boring, uninteresting, excessive? So the duration of doing things in society also plays a role. If you listen to somebody else and you understand what they are saying, is it your obligation to respond in kind just because they reached out to you, because they engaged with you? I can tell you the number of times that I have been asked questions by different individuals that are, for example, inappropriate and personal. And their expectation, of course, is that I'm going to respond. But just because you are asked a question or asked to do something does not mean we have to. So the sensitivity on whether or not you should or should not respond, and if you choose to respond, then how to do that is equally critical. I shared with you a little bit before that I started my career out working at a state psychiatric hospital. This was in California, in Los Angeles. During that time that we were working with these patients suffering from schizophrenia, we were teaching them basic components of communication. Now, mind you, these are individuals who are very low functioning, adults who were suffering from psychosis, had lost their way, and had dramatic difficulties engaging with other people. And we taught them basic skills, taught them how to ask questions in a proper way, relevant questions. We taught them how to offer compliments to other people. We taught them simply how to make statements and share information with other people. We taught them the value of self-disclosure, acknowledging or sharing something about themselves that was personal. And we were successful by and large. We published a fairly substantial and very well-respected body of literature in this area of social skills, working with some of the most difficult of individuals in our society. In other words, these skills, if they are not already possessed, can be learned. And we applied these outcomes, these research outcomes, to the real world when we developed, as I shared with you before, also at the state hospital, TheLife Skills Center, in which individuals who would typically come into the hospital and stay for only usually 3 or 4 days until they stabilized psychologically, psychiatrically, and then were allowed to return back to their homes in the community. We taught these broad skills of being able to navigate their social worlds, but across a wide variety of areas, from how to go to a grocery store and shop for items, of how to apply for a job, of how to get onto a bus and ask for change, et cetera, et cetera. Social skills, all of them. If the most challenged of individuals in society can learn them, we all can learn them, of course. We must be flexible, as I mentioned before, in our application of these skills across a wide variety of demand situations, across different people, different situations. What are our goals of the specific messaging that we want to deliver to somebody else? Why do we want to do something or say something to an individual? For what purpose? So to display proper and effective interpersonal communication, we cannot separate the need for effective verbal and nonverbal components, the words and the questions and all that stuff. We can't separate it from the need to have effective, what's called executive functioning. Many of you have heard this term before. Executive functioning applies to our memory. It applies to our thinking abilities, sometimes called cognitive flexibility, and it applies to things like self-control. This is executive functioning. And executive functioning is responsible for many skills that include paying attention, organizing and planning and setting priorities. It's responsible for starting a task and staying focused until the task is completed. It's responsible for understanding different points of view. Are you able to be flexible enough to look at an issue by standing in the shoes of the other person? Are you willing to do that? Or are you steadfast in where you are? That's a lack of flexibility. What we need more of, especially in today's society, we need more flexibility, more willingness to look at the world through the lens that other people wear. Executive function is also responsible for regulating our emotions, how we react emotionally to other people. And it is responsible for keeping track of what it is you're doing at any moment in time, of being mindful, our ability to self-monitor, to keep a track on what it is that we are doing at any moment in time, to understand its impact on ourselves and others. I'd like to share with you a concept that's not spoken about very often within the arena of interpersonal skills and interpersonal skills training. And that is a concept that's referred to as social styles. Social styles. Now, social styles are not specific components of our social and interpersonal social activities, but they're broad categories that I believe help to explain and help us to understand why people are different in the way that they interact socially. There's been a lot of research that has been done in this area. It started out, frankly, in the early 1930s and 40s when psychologist researchers were interested in looking at little babies' temperament and their emotions, and to try to categorize the temperament early on in life of these little toddlers. And from that body of research, it evolved over many, many, many decades. And now we have categorization that also speak to social styles and abilities. Some of you may have run across some of this type of body of literature when you were in the workplace, or even now as you are working. There are tools that some of you may have run across, such as the Myers-Briggs, many of you have heard of, which help to categorize styles of interactions of employees. There's another tool that's called DISC, D-I-S-C, which is similar in its design, intended to provide categories so people understand the differences between one party and another. So within social styles, there are a number of different categories that speak to our ability to have effective communications with others. So one of those is what's referred to as competency. We want to be flexible. We want to demonstrate optimism. We want to persevere. We want to be conscientious. And ideally, we want to stay optimistic. We want to stay positive. Nobody likes to be around a negative person. It doesn't feel good, right? We want also then to be in a position that we can accept feedback from others. Active listening, to actually pay attention to what the other person is saying and demonstrate to that person that you are engaged, you are laser focused on what they are saying, on their message, and you are not distracted by other stuff. Incidentals, you're not looking at your phone. You're not turning your eyes to your cell phone to see who just sent you a text message. We want to ensure that our communication is going to be adaptive, meaning it's going to have a role in making us better, and we want to apply empathy. So let me share with you rather quickly these 4 different social styles. The first is what is called the driving style, or the driver. These individuals tend to be rather controlling, they're very decisive, and they work at a very, very fast pace. Other people see them as very direct and forceful, very determined. And they usually initiate a social interaction as opposed to other people initiating. And they focus their efforts and the efforts of other people to achieve the objectives that they want to accomplish. They're very action-oriented. The next category is an expressive individual. And these are folks who are very enthusiastic, and they tend to be kind of emotional. Think of them perhaps as drama queens, but take it a tone down. Emotionally expressive. These folks are ones that are willing to make their feelings known to one another. They wear their hearts on their sleeves. They can perhaps appear to react impulsively and maybe openly show both positive and negative feelings. And most people will then describe them as being very personable, talkative, and sometimes opinionated because they are open and more than willing to share how they are feeling. These individuals need approval from others. They need approval from others. The next style are folks who are referred to as amiable. These individuals tend to be friendly and supportive, and they are very relationship driven. These people are willing and will gladly, openly display their feelings to others, and they tend to be less demanding and more agreeable than others are. So rather than sort of wanting wanting all the limelight to shine upon them, like an expressive person, these are folks who simply want everybody to be agreeable. They're interested in achieving a rapport with everybody. And other people will describe them often as informal, kind of casual, and very easygoing. And their focus is on personal security, and they're very much oriented towards relationships and relationship building. And lastly, there are individuals, the last category is the analytical. These people are thoughtful, they tend to be reserved, and they usually are slow-paced in how they do things. They're often described by others as quiet and very logical, and sometimes too cautious, but certainly reserved. And they tend to appear sometimes as kind of distant from others, and they may not communicate with others unless there's a specific need to do so. These are people who think a lot, and they really want to be right, and often they are because they do so much research. It doesn't mean, however, their ability to communicate that with others is any more enhanced. So why is it important to understand these categories or be aware of them? Certainly, it's because not that you as an individual have a style, and most of us have elements of a lot of these styles, usually one predominant one and then some secondary ones. Most important thing is to recognize that we may not be able to change from one style to the other, but we can learn these styles, learn to recognize them in other people. And when you recognize what other people possess as their style, we can begin to try to mimic them so that we can meet them at their level. at their level. No misalignment. I am analytical. You're a driver. We're not speaking the same language, although we're both speaking English. The driver and the amiable, not seeing eye to eye, like they're speaking again, Tower of Babel. But if each of those parties can recognize the other, they can come closer and create alignment, hence improve communication. Now, there are what we refer to sometimes as established and unestablished rules of engagement in society. So for example, we've all heard the term etiquette. So there are, in some situations, specific rules that have been designed by some people long before I was born, rules that are designed to monitor and regulate how people engage in certain situations. These might be sitting properly in a formal fine dining restaurant. That's how we think of etiquette, or dressing in a particular way. But it also includes things like how to behave properly if you're stopped by a police officer. How should you behave in a house of worship, a church or mosque or a synagogue? How should you behave when you're chewing food when others are present? Is it not important to avoid yelling the word fire in a theater, in a crowded theater? Of course. These are rules of etiquette that have been established. But there are other interactions that are not so prescripted, meaning that there aren't these fixed rules and guidelines on how we should be interacting with others. Now, let's talk a little bit about, unfortunately, being part of the family of alienated parents and grandparents and other family members. Are there some unique interpersonal challenges faced by an individual who is estranged from or alienated by another party? As you well know, for those of you who are alienated, that once you recognized that this phenomenon was taking place and you were a victim of it, it felt surreal. It felt unreal, like a bad dream, a nightmare. This can't be happening. And among other emotions like shock and disbelief also comes feelings of anger and anxiety and depression and the like. So the question becomes this: if one is experiencing genuine anger and sadness, does that compromise your ability to read the social cues properly, to read the demands that are being presented by your situation? Are you able to remain properly calm and strategic in how you deliver your message to others, what it is that you deliver? Are you able to play to go to the end game? Or is it just for the moment because there's a greater emotional reaction than intellectual reaction? You must interface with courts, often on a very regular basis. You must have conversations with nasty lawyers. You might be disenfranchised or abandoned by former friends, neighbors. You might find yourself somewhat isolated. You might find yourself in a precarious situation where you are alienated from one child, but your other child has a good relationship with you. How do you navigate the relationship with each of those children, if indeed you have the opportunity to engage with the child that is alienated? You know, when you are in a situation where you must engage with these individuals, it's unclear if any of these people really have your best interest in mind, let alone the best interest of the children who are involved. So a question arises in, how do you convey information to these people and ensure that you do not put them off, even if they deserve to be put off? How do you transmit to them information that will help them to recognize your situation what you are thinking, what you are feeling, your position in certain matters, and get them to do the things that should be done in order to bring about wholeness once again into family. How do you sound rational and ensure that you achieve your messaging goals? And you must communicate this across situations and across different types of individuals. Attorneys, again, courts, GALs, strangers. You must communicate with your estranged kids and grandkids. You must also, at some point in time, communicate with an alienating parent, your alienating partner. How do you do that? In a way that is going to allow you to achieve your goals and for the children to be in the optimal place possible to live healthy and fulfilling lives as they get older. How do you do this communication? What mechanism do you use? Do you use text messaging? And if so, it's fraught with challenges, but can be used. Email, how do you communicate these messages and convey the emotionality in writing, digitally? How do you do it if you have a phone call? Mind you, you are conveying your emotionality through the phone, but is it being interpreted correctly? Likewise, we can do it via Zoom or some other telecommunications platform, where not only do we now have a voice, we have visual, versus in person. All of these different situations require nuance and skill. We must pay careful attention to what the other person is saying or doing. And this holds true for the other party if we're speaking and doing. They must pay careful attention to what it is we're doing or saying. Absent that, there's the opening for misinterpretation and miscalculation. We can't, in other words, rely simply on partial information, which can occur if you don't give that other speaker, the other individual, the other person with whom you're interacting, your full attention. We also need positive self-esteem, self-assurance, and good self-control, a positive attitude, using effective self-talk, talking to yourself, monitoring what it is you're saying to yourself. Is it positive? Is it healthy? Is it building or is it destroying? We must ask ourselves, are we thinking in distorted ways and incorrect ways just because we are upset and angry, perhaps rightfully so? But are we thinking in an unhealthy way? Are we anticipating bad things to happen and therefore experiencing anxiety in anticipation of something that might happen, not that necessarily will happen? I want to introduce just for a quick moment here, a concept that's referred to as microaggressions. This is a term that has not been used by and large within the parental alienation discourse, but something I'd like to introduce to you. And this is an area that colleagues and I are beginning to do some preliminary research. Microaggressions, and the term was coined back in the early 1970s by researchers who were investigating the discrimination that was being experienced by racial minorities, most specifically the African American Black communities. The idea of a microaggression is that these are aggressive acts being committed by somebody, but they're very subtle. They're very nuanced. They don't appear to be aggression, but they result in the same thing that overt aggression does: being sidelined, being discriminated against, being hurt. And it struck me as, and this began about a year or so ago, it struck me when I became exposed to this particular area of research, that this actually, interestingly enough, applies to the alienation model, this concept, where you as alienated parents and grandparents experience this process that, unbeknownst to you, was actually gradually, systematically trying to drive a wedge in the relationship between you and your loved ones. But you didn't interpret it at the time as an aggressive act. The idea, for example, that if there was a visitation schedule that the child, for example, informs you, or that the alienating parent would then inform you that, oh, little Susie can't make it today, she has too much homework. She'll come for the next scheduled time. Or finding your name and contact information removed from a child's school docket, where they don't even know, where the teachers and the administrators don't even know you exist. How do we recognize that this is happening? I'll be sharing more of this over the next year or so as we continue to do this, the research that we're following up on now. These are subtle forms of alienating behavior, but it certainly explains why it is that sometimes alienated parents and grandparents wake up and suddenly realize, oh my God, I've been alienated. I no longer have a relationship with my little one. What happened? How did this happen? What did I miss? And I believe that the concept of microaggressions might serve as an interesting theoretical model to understand that, and eventually to be able to develop a protocol, a methodology, procedures to help people recognize the early warning signs of parental alienation. There are any number of cases where people have been alienated that are not typical. And I just want to very quickly draw your attention to a few of my own clients from the last year. I have a client named Evan, who was actually alienated by 2 ex-wives and the children they had within each of those 2 relationships. And Evan's problem was anger management. He was furious that this happened and that the court seemingly did not recognize what was happening. And so addressing his anger management allowed him to then navigate the family law system more effectively and regain access to his children. Another client, Aaron, who I first met, he was not even aware that he had been alienated. He was just surprised that his daughter, who was a teenager at the time, wasn't reaching out to him as often as she used to. Turns out she hadn't reached out to him in over a year. He had been alienated, wasn't aware. We taught him assertiveness skills. Another woman, Mindy, who was alienated by all 4 of her children. When one child independently reconciled with her, then what happened was that the other children who were still estranged from her began to attack the other daughter. And the question was how to best protect that daughter and facilitate engagement with the others. And again, we taught self-regulation, mindfulness, and assertiveness. I worked with a daughter, with a child, Sarah, who was initially alienated by her dad and was then therefore granted, she was living full-time with her mom. And then the court decided to reverse custody, and dad became the primary custodian. Once that happened, then dad started alienating mom. So we got it from both directions, and the poor child was as confused as could be. What do we need to remain effective? We want to be mindful. We want to pay attention to the here and now. What is actually happening to us? Use problem solving to figure out what are the likely causes of what's occurring, and then take action steps. We want to communicate verbally. We want to combine that with effective nonverbal skills. And I'm sure many of these specific mechanics you're going to be learning from some of our other presenters during this conference. We must constantly learn to be flexible. It's kind of like being a boxer in a ring, always preparing for the next strike by your opponent. Prepare for the next interaction. Speak less. Less is more. When you're speaking, you can't be listening. Can't do them both at the same time. If you want to learn how best to navigate your environment, let the other person speak. Be the good role model and don't prejudge other people, because oftentimes we misjudge and anticipate things that aren't going to happen or wouldn't happen had we not misjudged. And then finally, we want to adopt and teach others the concept of gratitude. As difficult as life sometimes feels, that to adopt a concept of feeling gracious for the blessings that we do have will get us a lot farther down the road than by maintaining and holding on to the sadness, which is understandable, but doesn't allow us to move forward quite often. And so finally, I just want to close with a few principles for creating effective social connections. Now, I must admit to you that I stole some of these principles from an author who authored a book back, I believe, in the 1920s, named Dale Carnegie. And he authored a book which at one point in time was the second best-selling book next to the Bible. And the book is entitled, many of you may know, How to Win Friends and Influence People. In other words, how to be effective socially. And these are some of his principles. So I'm going to close on sharing with you some of his ideas. First of all, he says, become genuinely interested in other people. Don't just show the signs that you are present, but instead that you are mentally present, that you are completely and thoroughly fascinated and interested in other people and how well they are doing, and that allows you to then shift your direction and how do I help people? And when you are focused on helping others, of course, you will help them and you'll help yourself as well. Smile a lot. I don't remember the exact statistic here, but over my many years professionally, I've heard the term that something like thousands of different muscles are involved in making a frown, but only a handful in smiling. People respond to smiles. They like to see people who appear to be friendly, open, and happy. You will draw a lot of people to you, even if they don't necessarily love what it is you have to say. They will engage with you. They'll connect with you at one level. Next, remember that a person's name is, to them, the most important sound they will ever hear. And so there's value in using and repeating people's names. Makes them feel good, allows you, of course, to create a connection between the name and a face. But it is personal and it is emotionally close. It's binding and bonding. Be a good listener. Encourage other people to talk about themselves. Never criticize, condemn, or complain. Basic rules of human interaction. Be honest with others and express your appreciation to them sincerely with all your heart and soul. Make the other person feel important. And again, do it sincerely. Make them feel like they are the most important person in the world at that moment in time, because in their mind, they are. Now, remember, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. It's not always easy, but we can navigate our way through a conversation without it becoming heated, without it becoming argumentative in nature, but instead simply a discussion, a conversation. And every time it feels like the temperature of the conversation is rising, what do we do instead? Take it down a notch. Show respect for other people's opinions. Now, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Try honestly to see things from the other person's perspective. They may have a valid viewpoint, and it'll help you to understand them better and to prepare your position more effectively to meet your needs as well. And then finally, begin with praise and honest appreciation. Let people know they are important and appreciated in your lives. So by way of summary, interpersonal skills, social communication is the most crucial base ability that we have as human beings and drives our effectiveness in our lives. I hope that my remarks today gave you some insights, some understanding, some perhaps tools and ways of moving forward to help your lives and the lives of all your family members be richer and more meaningful and simply make you feel good. Have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.